Welcome, this is Charlie from CIC News for You with a topic I hope will inform you about the Democratic nominee for president, Joe Biden. If you are like me, you are concerned. But do you know the reasons why you should be concerned? The reasons other than he is a Democrat moving extreme left? Well, I'm going to provide you all of my other reasons for my concerns, which the media seems to not be reporting on. Or if they are reporting on some of these items, it is placed on the back page or hidden somewhere in the publication. Or for news channels, they might give it a 60-second spot and quickly gloss over it. All of this effort by liberals to try to make Joe Biden a contender in the 2020 elections. In this video, I will cover some of the baggage that the media is glossing over or totally ignoring, because each of us, as citizens, should know the background for anyone running for President of the United States. This is my effort to inform you. I will be focusing on Biden's history on legislation and political stances, and of course I will review some of his gaffes, of which there are many. The media is absolutely quiet about Biden's past, and for good reasons, as you'll see. So, a couple of facts about Joe Biden. He is 77 years old. I'm not making any judgments, but this could be a concern for some voters. Let's cover some age facts on previous presidents, and including Trump. If you look at the chart with the blue highlights, you will see that Donald J. Trump is the oldest president ever sworn in at 70 years old. Biden is 77. And as you can see on the chart with the red highlights, Reagan was the oldest president exiting from office at 77. This should be a big concern for voters. It seems to me that we are actually voting for Biden's vice president, and we don't even know who that is yet. And that could be the bigger problem, in my opinion. Let's continue. Joe has been in politics for over 40 years. Get that? 40 plus years in politics. That is way too long and is why our country is where we are now. We already have a bunch of lifetime politicians feeding their egos and pockets with taxpayer money. We have too many politicians worried about power over people, and we don't need another one. Lifetime politicians have to go. Term limits, in my opinion. To wrap up this intro, Joe Biden was in the Senate from 1973 to 2009. And then, of course, from 2009 to 2016, he was a two-term vice president under Obama. What needs to be highlighted, though, is Biden's history while in Congress. You would think there would be many accomplishments for Biden to present to the people. But I don't think he has the material that the progressives are looking for, except that he was the vice president under Obama, and he's now their choice to dethrone Trump. As far as Joe's congressional history, he has been on the wrong side of a lot of political decisions. Well, enough of this diatribe. Let's get to the Joe Biden, the Democrat presidential nominee, a nominee that is hiding in his basement, just like the House of Representatives are hiding in their homes. Let's continue. A funny thing about Joe. In 1974, during an interview, he described himself as liberal on civil rights and liberties, along with senior citizens' concerns and health care, but conservative on other issues, including abortion and the draft. As a long time ago, it seems Joe has changed quite a bit, which will be evident during this video. Okay, let's dig a bit further into his history. In 1984, Biden was a Democratic floor manager and sponsor for the successful passage of the Comprehensive Crime Control Act. This act imposed mandatory minimum sentences. Well, who was impacted the most by this legislation? The African American community. Where's the media on this? In 1986, Biden co-sponsored the Anti-Drug Abuse Act that treated crack cocaine, primarily in black communities at the time, far more harshly than powdered cocaine, which was more common among white drug users. And he has the nerve to state you ain't black if you don't vote for him? I wonder how many blacks have been incarcerated because of his support of this bill, along with the Crime Control Act. To continue, Biden, as the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, basically wrote and managed the whole legislative process for the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994. During this time frame, experts stated this law exacerbated the issues of the previous laws. This law includes the 3 strikes mandatory life sentences and increased federal crimes subject to the death penalty. It also enabled juveniles to be tried as adults for violent and firearm crimes. So who was impacted the most? The African American community. This act was responsible for the lockup of thousands upon thousands of blacks for what is now considered a far reach and a very bad bill. Of course, President Trump has updated this bill, turning around the wrongful arrests and imprisonment of thousands of blacks and whites. So, who is actually supporting the African American community? You decide. Where's the media on Trump's accomplishment correcting Biden's past efforts? This is 3 strikes on Biden, but he keeps coming back to the batter's box. So in 2010, during the Obama administration, the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 was passed that reduced the disparity between the amount of crack cocaine and powder cocaine needed to trigger certain federal criminal penalties, and eliminated the 5-year mandatory minimum sentence for simple possession of crack cocaine. Good for Obama. He fixed the mistakes that were made by Joe. To summarize, Biden voted and sponsored 3 acts that were devastating to the black community, and Obama fixed the issues or part of them, and Trump topped it off with a bill the Democrats wanted to pass but could never get passed. Funny how no one talks about this Trump success in the media. I wonder why. One last tidbit of an op-ed quote from Biden. In 2002, Joe stated, "What works in the fight against crime? It's simple. More police on the streets. Put a cop on 3 or 4 corners and guess where the crime is going to be committed? On the 4th corner, where the cop isn't. More cops clearly means less crime." And now Biden is for defunding the police? Why does the media not bring up this past quote from Biden and have him explain? Also, would this not be strike 4? I think it is. Let's cover what I consider as additional strikes. In 1993, Joe voted for Act 10, USC 654, which is called the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Act. What was this legislation? In a nutshell, this act includes a federally mandated policy that states homosexuality is incompatible with military life, banning gay Americans from serving in the United States Armed Forces in any capacity without exception. Another strike for Joe? I'm beginning to lose count. I wonder why the media doesn't cover this, if even only to show that Biden apologized for this mistake. But then that might bring up other questions about Joe's integrity. I don't understand why there is no pushback from the LGBTQ groups that hated this policy. But then this is an anything goes to take down Trump world that we live in my opinion. Onward now. In 1996, Biden voted in favor of the Defense of Marriage Act. What did this act do? It prohibited the federal government from recognizing any same-sex marriage, barring individuals in such marriages from equal protection under federal law and allowing states to do the same. And still we hear no pushback by the LGBTQ groups? I guess all is forgiven. Then, in the mid-1970s, Biden was one of the Senate's leaders opposed to desegregation busing. I think this is another major mistake for Joe Biden, and we have been out of strikes now for a while. So let's just call this a bad decision by a politician. But remember, this person is running for president. Do we trust his decision making enough for him to be president? In my opinion, definitely not. In October 1975, he did an interview with NPR and basically stated the following. The whole quote is on the slide. I'm paraphrasing. I think the concept of busing, that we are going to integrate people, is a rejection of the whole movement of Black pride. Desegregation is a rejection of the entire Black awareness concept, where Black is beautiful, Black culture should be studied, and the cultural awareness of the importance of their own identity, their own individuality. Wow, is all I have to say against desegregation, and claims to be the African American presidential nominee or representative for the African American people. Joe voiced concerns not just about the policy of busing, which he had supported when first seeking election in 1972, and he argued that segregation was good for Blacks and was what they wanted. Another wow statement by Joe. Now let's discuss Biden's stance on women's reproductive rights. Most of his votes were for limits on abortion, and this would be expected since he's a confirmed Catholic. But now get this, in March of 1982, Biden voted in committee to approve a constitutional amendment that allowed states to overturn Roe v. Wade. That was a major event, and it goes along with his religious beliefs. But the amendment never came to a vote. But where's the media reporting on this? So over time, Biden migrates away from his religious beliefs because it is contrary to the Democratic progressives. And in the 2012 vice presidential debate, he states he believes that life begins at conception, as his religion teaches, but tap dances and says the government could not impose that belief on everyone. But Joe states that the government should not help pay for women to have an abortion. That statement is very contrary to the Democratic ideology. But it doesn't end here. In a dramatic reversal, Joe Biden, attending a DNC summit, announced he would call for a repeal of the Hyde Amendment against his moral beliefs. First off, do we want a president that goes against his moral beliefs? You decide. Do you know what the Hyde Amendment is? I'll tell you. It is the borrowing of federal funds to pay for abortion, except to save the life of a woman or if the pregnancy arises out of incest or rape. Now remember, Joe Biden is a supposedly practicing Catholic, but just like Nancy Pelosi, both have disregarded their beliefs for power. That is not uncommon, but the issue here is that both still say they are practicing Catholics. I think not. So it looks like Biden stating that he is a politician for the African American community isn't all that it seems, nor is he anti-abortion as he was. Just look at the flip-flops and you will see he does what the progressives ask. He is a follower, not a leader, in my opinion. He has too much baggage. Shame on the media for staying as far away from these topics as possible. That is why our job is to inform others, in my opinion. There's more to come. Let's review a bit more of his history. In the early 2000s, Joe co-sponsored legislation to make it harder for people to qualify for bankruptcy protection. Now, there is a key point to this legislation. It makes it a lot more difficult for common households to wipe out their debts. Now, in my opinion, this is not necessarily bad legislation, at least from a conservative viewpoint, because it makes people accountable for their debt. But for a liberal running for president, this is opposite of what he is running on. And what makes this bad is Joe did it because of donations by financial companies to his campaign. I'm from Delaware, just as Joe, and for those of you that are not aware, Delaware is the state where numerous banks have headquarters. So that was pandering by Joe. And I wonder what these institutions think of him now. He has now done another flip-flop. Seems to be a common move by Biden. Change with the flow, no principles, in my opinion. The Democrats have been criticizing the Republicans for some time up now about the Iraq War. And whether this criticism is correct or not, Joe pushed for the Iraq War while Democrats controlled the Senate. In addition, Biden was the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee and actually pushed this legislation and was individually responsible for a lot of the deception to get this approved. You can check out the facts. I think he has since apologized, but we'll see if he does it again. Strikes, apologies, and flip-flops seem to be the normal course of action by Joe Biden. There's no way he should even be on the Democratic ticket. But of course, the party is working hard to keep Joe in the basement and working with the media to keep this quiet. Well, I am not being quiet. Here's another biggie. Do you remember the confirmation hearing of Justice Clarence Thomas and the accusations of sexual harassment by Anita Bryant? Well, during these hearings, Joe Biden was the Senate Judiciary Chair. That is a strong position with a lot of control. There are many people at the time that criticized Joe for his inaction and structure of the hearings, and yet he thinks he is qualified for the presidency. Joe did not call 3 key witnesses that he could have subpoenaed. He failed at protecting Anita Hill by not calling these witnesses. He has since apologized. Well, add another one to his list. Anita Hill stated in 2016, I did expect that the chair would be fair and gathered the testimony from the relevant witnesses, like the 3 women who were not called in to testify, like the experts on sexual harassment that could have helped inform the committee about how the problem manifests itself. Wow, ready for more? Here goes. Let's move on to Ukraine and Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden did hold a directorship for a Ukrainian gas company while his father was vice president, and that is fact. Experts agree that Hunter Biden's acceptance of the position created a conflict of interest for his father. What would happen if one of Trump's sons took on a job with a foreign country? The left would be outraged, but for Joe they are complicit in silence. Common theme for the party and the media. One key item that the Democrats use against Trump is his sons' and daughters' businesses. The key difference that is generally not reported, though, is that Trump's kids all had these businesses before Trump was elected. So it is a bogus claim by the Democrats. But Biden's son took on this business while his father was a vice president. Remember this because the media and Democrats try to say it is the same thing. It is not the same, period. Let's continue on with this subject. Hunter Biden's Burisma directorship was an issue because Burisma was owned by a Ukraine minister under Russia-friendly President Yanukovych, who went into exile after a popular revolution. These folks left because of corruption-related investigations involving Burisma, where Hunter Biden was a director. Why is the media not looking into this? Joe Biden's campaign told PolitiFact that the vice president learned about his son's role on the board through media reports and never discussed anything related to this company with his son. I'm not sure I really believe this, but I have no proof it is not true. But the key is stated by the New York Times, of all newspapers, and they said, the credibility of the vice president's anti-corruption message may have been undermined by Hunter Biden's dealings with the company. Joe had a responsibility to talk to his son and advise about the conflict of interest issue since he was vice president. He failed to do this. What will he fail at next? Well, let's see here. Seems like Joe likes to overstate his college accomplishments at law school. And he stated he graduated in the top half of his class and that he attended law school on a full scholarship and that he had received 3 degrees in college. Wow, that's some great accomplishments. Except each of these statements are untrue or an exaggeration, and that's being polite. The records show he graduated 76 out of 85. And to wrap up this slide, Joe's advisors came out and stated to reporters that Joe falsely claimed to have marched in the civil rights movement. Did he just forget? Or did he just make this up? Well, how truthful and transparent is Joe? Seems like he has a lot of baggage. I have already mentioned Joe Biden and his flip-flop on abortion, but it is significant enough to cover his 1974 quote, which was, "I don't think a woman has the sole right to say what should happen to her body." This statement is so anti-progressive, I'm not sure why it hasn't hit the news. Well, I am reporting it now. What a big flip-flop Joe is. What can we expect of him as a president? I believe he will flop to anything the progressives want. We cannot allow this person to be president, in my opinion. There's one more example of plagiarism on this slide that you can read, and it shows he has no issue with using statements from others and claiming them as his own. How did Biden respond when questioned about his repeated plagiarism incidents? He said it was much ado about nothing. I guess he doesn't care. Is this presidential material? I think not. Another major statement that is concerning is his support of George Wallace, a senator from Alabama, and he stated that Democrats need more like him. That is definitely out of line with the Democrats' ideology. Do you know George Wallace was a strong advocate of segregation and was an actual high-level Ku Klux Klan member when he was younger? I'm not sure why the media doesn't cover this or why we have not seen any comments from Black Lives Matter or other African American groups. You think somebody would speak up and bring this up? And finally, on this slide is a comment made by Joe that would outrage the left and would be headlines if Trump said anything close to this statement. He said, "You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent." Oh, I'm not joking. That's Joe's exact words to an Indian American supporter in the late 2000s. Amazing. But there is more. In reference to Obama, he said, "I mean, you got the first mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy." I don't know, that doesn't sound like an appropriate statement to me. But the media and African Americans seem to be ignoring it. I'm not sure why. Joe has a trend that is very clear if you follow the trail I just laid out. Joe also makes a statement saying that Hillary would make a better vice president than him. To me, that disqualifies him for president, using his own words. Oh, and how about the time he told a wheelchair member of Congress to stand up and take praise? That must have made a lot of folks uncomfortable. And then you have Joe talking about his lack of memory when swearing in Obama during his second term. And of course, we can't forget his major gaffe on TV stating this is a big effing deal. What if Trump used this word? So many double standards with the left. And in reference to his comment to a person at an event, he said, "You're a lying, dog-faced pony soldier." What the heck is that statement? Apparently, this is in reference to a historical event, but it was inaccurate. His response to questioning by the media was, "The details are irrelevant in terms of decision making." I don't know about that. Oh yeah, and he wants to be president. Come on, man. And as recently as this year, Biden made a statement about Iraq. but he used Iran instead. He's even getting countries mixed up. Was this a memory lapse again? I could go on, but we'll wrap this up with a few more examples. He stated, "We choose truth over facts." Huh? What's this mean? He also said, "Let's do push-ups together," when talking to a person with a question about his age. And finally, a statement at a presentation ceremony where he was confused and told someone he was presenting to in reference to his mom. God rest her soul. But guess what? It was his dad that passed away, not his mom. Can you imagine if Trump made this mistake? The news would say he's too old, he is losing his memory, or anything else they could add in. But it's okay for good old Joe. I'm concerned about Joe, and we need to do what we can to make sure he is not elected, in my opinion. There's more, but for now, I think I've made the point that Joe should not even be on the ticket for president. He is a real concern. To wrap up this video, I want to point out Joe's direction for his platform, and all I need to say is Bernie Sanders and AOC, two advisors on his committees. What kind of policies do you think that will generate? Beware, we cannot let this person win in 2020. It will be the destruction of our country as we know it, and all you have to do is watch the news. Okay, that brings us to the end of this video. And if you disagree with any of my presented facts, I suggest you do your research, and if I'm wrong, let me know. As normal, I am providing my references. Now, it is your time for you to be aware and inform others so we can make sure Joe Biden is a 3-time failure at running for president, in my opinion. Have a great day, be safe, be informed, and stay informed with CIC News for You. This is Charlie, signing off.